Alright, hello, my name is Tara Jones, and this is Talk Notch, a social psychology channel. Today's topic that we're going to discuss is about children and when to know if they have a diagnosis, what to do about it, and some things to know about diagnosing your child with having a disorder, what is normal and what is not. It's also important to mind your own stress level and pressure level and tension level about the situation. Good to bring awareness to how you are handling it as the parent. By and large, the material today is going to come from Yale University through Alan Kasdan with his Parenting and Child Development Psychology class. There are also going to be aspects that are discussed that come from Matt Kurtz at Wesleyan, as well as the University of Santa Cruz for the sociology department. So thank you all for your input and your classes that made any of this possible. So one of the things to know is that when your child is found to have a diagnosis, if this happens, this is not a stagnant positioning. There's always room for change, improvement, and there are ways that you can help aid your child in that recovery or that stability effort. So it does not mean that all is lost. I'd like to point out to you that Eckhart Tolle, one of the great minds of spirituality today, talks about that even in the event that you find a diagnosis, you are not your diagnosis. You are you. You have a diagnosis, but you are not that diagnosis. So, for example, little Timmy is bipolar. No. Little Timmy has bipolar. Okay, so that's a really important distinction as to not overly personalize or overly condemn another with that judgment or label. If you feel as a parent that your child is exhibiting behavior that you don't feel that you can help and you do need a mental health professional, or you suspect that you do, it doesn't hurt to go in and get a preliminary interview with the psychologist to see their opinion on if this is a big deal or if it's a sign of an MO, or maybe you'll be pleasantly learning that these behaviors are not a big deal or are normal considering the situation. Often parents hesitate to go get mental health treatment for their children because they're afraid that they will be blamed. They're afraid that they will lose reputation or feel like they aren't good parents. In the case of mental illness, it is not usually coming from bad parenting so much as genetic factors or maybe environmental stressors that could aid in this coming to fruition. So if that's your concern, it's not worth your child losing out on mental health because you're afraid of facing your own. It's also worth mentioning that when you're a parent, before we jump to looking at individual MOs, we also need to look at the sociological factors around your child, such as what is their environment like? What does their level of safety in the home seem like? How do they relate to their peers? Have there been any changes in friend group, location, school, or any other big contributing factors within the household, say a loss of a family member or an addition of a family member, anything that can cause stress. You may see temporary ramifications for whatever this event was, and in which case, that's normal. There are adjustment periods that are normal. After a loss, for example, one does grieve. After going to a new school, it takes time to adjust. So this does not mean that your child has a mental illness. 6 warning signs that we're going to walk through. The first one is impairment. And this means that whatever it is, behavioral change that's going on is actually affecting their normal life. They're unable to meet the demands of their school environment or their work environment if they're older, or their home environment. They're just falling below that normal level of functioning. So that's a warning sign. That does not mean that they have a mental illness, but it is something to look at. What might those causes be? How can you help shape their behavior? And do you need additional help beyond yourself? Maybe you work all the time and you're not there. Maybe your communication with your child is waning. Now, in the case that your communication with the child is waning, maybe it is good to have another person introduced that they feel safe to talk to. However, you can also improve your communication with your child through simple things like modeling communication with your child. If you don't share about you, you're not welcoming your child to speak about them. So be sure to also share with your child. Doesn't mean we have to overshare. It doesn't mean that we have to expose them to adult problems or adult material. But it does mean that you are able to be intimate with your child enough to say, you know, I had this day at work, and man, I had this customer that was so difficult. And luckily I was able to overcome that. But man, it was a challenge for me too. That's okay to share about things like that. And it can welcome the child to talk about their stressors as well. Talk about their points of tension. And you guys can work together to develop solutions and an alternative methods of dealing with whatever issues that might come up. Now, if it does seem that you need additional help, then seek it. Another warning sign would be changes in sleep or slow to socializing. This might be normal. Say your child moves to a new town. Well, that can be really awkward to be the new one when everyone knows that you're new. And there might be a time of adjustment where your child feels lonely or unable to really pick up the pace of socializing like the other kids who've known the children all along. So that does not mean that there's something major going on. It does mean that you need to monitor those things, because if their loneliness or their lack of sleep becomes such an issue that they're unable to function or thrive, this might be worth considering addressing this issue. If your child suffers from aggression or anxiety to the point where it's affecting their friends or their ability to have friendships or their activities in their daily life, their schooling, their education, their family time, then you need to look at this aggression and try to figure out its origins. Is it a temporary upset due to an event that just happened, or is it something larger that you're not understanding? It's also important as a parent to see where you might be contributing to this. You know, sometimes the child's anger problem is not an anger problem. They have a problem with you being a bad parent. Sorry, but speaking for the children here, it does happen. I'm not saying that you're a bad parent. Probably, if you're trying to look into tapes like these to increase your awareness of how to parent and what to look for, you're probably a parent with a lot of awareness and mindfulness, in which case you're doing a great job. So a danger to yourself or others, or repeatedly being aggressive, might be a warning or a red flag behavior, depending on how extreme it is. So you need to take a look at how dangerous is this. In today's world, when schools see children who are making threats to hurt themselves or others, they're going to take this very seriously. And because we live in a day where school shootings are a reality, and we see that suicide's on the rise, we see that bullying or being bullied are things that are paid more attention to. And so if your child is expressing that they want to kill people, they will probably be removed and put into juvie for psychological evaluation. Now let's talk about abnormal psychology. What is normal and what is not? So let's talk about repetitive behaviors or things that might be, repetitive behaviors that might be detrimental or odd, strike you as odd. These might be warning signs that something deeper is happening. In the event of hearing or seeing something that is not there, may or may not be a mental diagnosis, may or may not be a big deal. When considering, so for example, if your child is muttering to themselves or maybe personifying a stuffed animal or doing different voices in a short span of time, and you're finding this to be odd or abnormal, maybe they have an imaginary friend or an imaginary pet, this might be totally normal. Say if they're 5 years old, totally normal. It's not a sign of mental illness. I'd like to remind you that schizophrenia, the onset for males isn't until they're much older, and for females as well, not until they're out of their child adolescent stage. Now, if at 12 years old you're noticing that your child is still talking to imaginary friends or maybe taking on different voices, this might be a time that you need to note that behavior as starting to become abnormal. So, by the way, so anyone with an imaginary friend or whatever, maybe a little story that you know isn't true, they say, whatever it is, Stegosaurus just walked in here. That's totally normal behavior for a 5-year-old. Seems odd, right? Yeah, but they're creative kids. There's also, when did it happen? Well, was it nighttime? Were they dreaming? Or was it in the middle of the day? These are also factors. Okay? There are a lot of reasons that children might have imaginary friends, for example, or the need to personify stuffed animals, let's say, toys or stuffed animals. That's fairly normal. People want company. And so if you are a little kid and you are learning to socialize, it can actually be a sign of empathy to do that through animals. It shows that they are emoting and identifying and creating characters from these stuffed animals or toys. And this is not a cause for alarm. It's all normal. One thing to know is that usually more aggressive or social or antisocial behaviors in that maybe instigating, getting into fights, hitting, biting, or yelling at children or pets or parents, these might really stand out as now is the time to get professional help, but you also need to realize that the quieter mental processes such as depression and anxiety can be just as detrimental, and these are a bit more withdrawn. These might not show huge behavioral issues, but instead more slight or subtle ones. What we're really looking for are unmanageable behaviors. Now, of course, there should still be shaping with your child, and the parent can't just rely on a therapist to do all their work for them. Now, they might find that their child is out of control, they're being very dominant or abusive or hyperactive or threatening. A counselor can help them with this. but also a parent can help them by praising the good behaviors and setting small goals for improvement. If you overshoot the mark and demand perfection, that the behavior stops immediately or else, this will not work. But if instead you have small manageable goals for improvement and applaud those goals, you will see a lot more of a cooperative child. This has been Tara Jones at Talk Notch. Please like and subscribe and share this channel. And I appreciate you. Have a good day.